The Warrior Priest, an After the Rift World novel, written by C.J. Archer, performed by Marion Hussey. Part 1, Chapter 1. I first met Rhys Mayhew when he plucked me out of the path of a runaway horse with one hand, a half-eaten apple wedged between his teeth. He told me later that he could only spare one hand because he didn't want to put down the tankard of ale he held in the other. He didn't spill a drop during the rescue, nor when he shoved me behind his 3 companions standing side by side near the entrance to the inn. The first and only drop fell when my pursuers arrived. I watched through the gap between 2 burly men sporting the symbol of the Warrior Priest's Order on their belted knee-length brown tunics as Rhys pointed the tankard in a southerly direction. He removed the apple from his mouth. "He went that way." "Thank you, brother," one of the constables said as he ran off. The fatter constable stood with hands on hips, his chest heaving as he sucked air into his lungs. Rhys handed him the tankard. "You look like you need this more than me." The constable gulped down the contents with the same enthusiasm he'd shown for pursuing me. He gave the tankard back and swiped a gloved hand across his mouth. "Oh, do bless you, brother." The constable set off. Once he and his colleague were out of sight, I turned to run. Rhys grasped me by the back of my doublet again. The leather was so thin, the seam so old, that it began to rip. "Let me go, oaf!" Rhys released me to the sounds of his priest brother's chuckling. He gave me what remained of the apple. "Walk with me. I have a business proposition for you that will put an end to your need to steal. It'll even put a roof over your head." He gave his friends a look, and they wordlessly entered the tavern. I fell into step alongside my saviour, although I suspected he shortened his stride so I didn't have to trot. His offer intrigued me. More than that, I knew what it could mean. A way out. When a warrior priest made you an offer to end your starvation, you took it. Famous for their discipline, sacrifice, and rigid adherence to their oaths, including celibacy, I felt safe assuming he didn't want me for my body. I greedily ate the apple, hardly swallowing one bite before taking the next. "Slow down," he said. "You'll give yourself a stomachache." I didn't slow down. I finished it core and all. We turned the corner, and I realized we were in the inn's courtyard. A groom led a horse into one of the stables while its rider strode to the rear door of the inn, a worn leather satchel under one arm. Another groom swept the cobblestones, while a third sat on a bale of hay, watching a boy struggle to roll a barrel across the uneven ground. No one paid us much attention. Our conversation wouldn't be overheard. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "A little spying here and there." "Why?" "Because you rarely make a mistake like the one you made today." He was right. Today had been different. I'd seen my mother's uncle for the first time in almost a year. While I was confident I'd done enough to change my appearance since then, seeing him again had brought back ugly memories. Panicked, I'd fumbled, then dropped the carrot I'd stolen from the costermonger's cart. He'd noticed and shouted, "Thief!" drawing the attention of constables who'd happened to be passing by. I studied the priest. He was classically handsome with his tanned skin, short brown hair, and clear blue eyes. But it wasn't merely his face that would have the women of tilting lamenting he'd chosen a life of celibacy. Tall, even for a Glansian man, and broad across the shoulders, I would have guessed he'd be capable of wielding a sword even if I hadn't seen his order's badge on his tunic. Yet it wasn't his good looks or impressive physique that made my heart flutter. There was something else, something I couldn't quite define. The spark in his eye and tilt of his lips made it seem as though he went through life in the best of humour, as if nothing troubled him and never would. For someone like me, whose life had shrunk to living in dank sewers and stealing scraps to survive, Rhys was magnetic. I learned later that he was only 24 when we met. That age never quite felt right. It seemed too old for the mischievous, youthful air that clung to him, and too young for the responsibilities that would one day burden him. But I didn't think about that until much later. "You've been watching me," I said, a challenge in my voice. "You're quick and nimble. I've seen you steal a bag of nuts at the market without the stallholder noticing, or some ells from a man's pocket, also unnoticed.
You have light fingers, and being small helps you slip away easily, or simply to blend in. Despite your poor attempt at a disguise, people usually take you for exactly what you want them to see. A boy.
I resisted the urge to touch my cropped hair, and instead settled my feet further apart, as I'd seen lads on the cusp of manhood do. I am a boy.
You must think I'm an idiot to fall for the girl disguised as a boy trick.
I gave in without a fight. For some reason, I wanted him to know. In my defense, people usually are idiots.
In my defense,
he mimicked. I'd never quite been able to lose my upper-class accent, and with him I'd barely even tried to hide it.
The child speaks like she just stepped out of her tutor's schoolroom.
I'm not a child. I'm 17. He scoffed.
Nice try. You're 13, 14 at most. Tell me, why is an educated girl living on the streets as a boy?
None of your business. It was a pathetic response, but it was all I could think of at the time. He'd unbalanced me with his assessment. He was right. I was educated, a girl, and living on the streets disguising myself as a boy. He only got my age wrong. I was 17. Perhaps if he'd studied my figure more closely, he'd have noticed, but he kept his gaze firmly fixed on my face.
What's your name?
Jack.
Short for Jacqueline?
When I didn't answer, he said,
My name's Rhys Mayhew. I'm a brother in the Order of Mehdu's Guards.
He tapped the badge depicting a sword crossing a blazing sun stitched into the tunic at his chest. I noticed. He removed a small pouch from his pocket, tossed it in the air and caught it. The clinking of L's had me salivating. The apple had been my only food that day.
An advance payment.
He dropped it onto my outstretched palm.
There'll be more if you meet me back here tonight when the temple bell strikes 11.
I stared at the pouch. How do you know I won't run off with your money and not come back?
You won't.
But how do you know? He smiled, revealing a dimple in each cheek, and signaled to the ostler to bring his horse. Weeks later, Rhys admitted that he hadn't known. He'd simply gambled on me being desperate enough. Once again, he was right. Even though my thieving kept me from starving, I was tired of always looking over my shoulder, tired of living in squalor, and sleeping with one eye open and my back to the wall. His offer was the best thing to happen to me since I ran away from my great-uncle's home. I had no choice but to accept, if I were to survive. Before the ostler could bring out Rhys's horse, the two constables walked past the entrance to the yard and just happened to look through the archway, directly at us.
There he is,
shouted one, pointing at me.
Brother, you've caught the thief. Thank you. Now hand him over.
Rhys regarded the advancing constables as if he didn't have a care in the world. In truth, he didn't. It was me who'd be thrown into prison if I were caught, not him. All he had to do was reassure the men that he had indeed caught me and was about to take me to the sheriff's office. He could claim I escaped on the way. The lie would keep his reputation pristine, and me free. Instead, he spoke to me under his breath.
I feel like having a little fun. Do you, Jack?
The constables strolled toward us, swords still in their scabbards. They weren't worried about me attacking them, and they were entirely unprepared for Rhys working against them. If your idea of fun is saving me, then yes. Do you have a plan?
Of course.
He clapped me on the back, grasping a fistful of my jerkin as he did so, and marched me toward the constables. My stomach plunged. He was apprehending me after all. Although I didn't say a word, he must have felt me tense beneath his grip.
Have faith, Jack.
The laconic drawl defined the carefree 24-year-old Rhys Mayhew. His words, however, would one day haunt me. Faith would tear us apart.
Slip past them while I distract them, he went on.
That's your plan?
You underestimate how distracting I can be.
Huh, nobody underestimates that. His grip loosened.
Good sirs, the lad is a slippery fish, but no one outwits a brother of Mehdu's Guards.
He angled us between the constables and the exit, then released me.
Here you go.
I ran. Behind me, I heard the constables shouting at me to stop, then at each other to go after me, then at Rhys for blocking the way.
You're obstructing us on purpose.
I didn't hear Rhys's response, or perhaps he didn't give one. The next moment, as I sprinted down the street, he drew up alongside me.
"Turn left," he directed. "Get lost in the market."
The market was always busy, and it was easier to disappear as long as you darted around carts, stalls, and people without knocking anything over. Easier, that is, if you were small and nimble. Rhys was surprisingly fleet for a large man, but he wasn't in the least unobtrusive. Everyone noticed him. I risked a glance behind us. They're still following.
Surprising. I thought they'd run out of steam by now.
He leapt over a wooden crate while I darted around it, only to have a wheelbarrow full of cabbages thrust at me. I wasn't sure if the cabbage seller did it on purpose or if it was an accident, but it slowed me down as I lost my balance. Rhys grasped me around my waist before I fell and tucked me into his side, lifting my feet off the ground. Not only was it an ungainly position, he would have felt all of my feminine curves, what little curves my undernourished figure had. "Put me down, I'm not a sack of potatoes." He glanced around and finally released me.
"Down that lane," he ordered. "We need to get out of the market. Coming here was a bad idea."
"I could have told you that if I'd known your plan." I tossed over my shoulder as I ran.
"It would have been a good plan if you'd avoided that wheelbarrow."
"How was I supposed to avoid it when it was shoved directly at me? I don't have legs like a giant leaping spider," I said pointedly.
"I've been compared to a few creatures before, not always favorably, but never a spider."
How could he sound so calm? My heart thundered in my chest, not only from fear but also exertion. I was used to sneaking, not running for my life. I dared another glance back at the pursuing constables, only to trip over the uneven cobblestones. Rhys once again grabbed my jerkin, causing the beleaguered seams at my shoulders to finally rip apart.
"You're good at thieving, not so good at escaping."
"I don't usually need to escape," I spat out between laboured breaths. "Today is not a good day."
"Cheer up. It's about to get better."
"Why?" I followed Rhys's gaze. He looked directly ahead where a brick wall loomed. The lane came to an end. The only exit was behind us, where the constables were still in pursuit. "How is that better?" He flashed a grin.
"Change of plan."
"What plan?" He stopped and linked his fingers together, forming a cradle.
"Up you go."
I looked up. The building was the only single-level one in the entire lane. With Rhys's help, I could escape across the roof, but could he climb up without any assistance? There was nothing for him to stand on to give him a boost.
"Now, Jack!"
It was the tersest he'd sounded throughout the entire escapade. I glanced along the lane. The constables had slowed, but there was no way to get past them out of the lane. "What about you?"
"Don't worry about me. I've been in stickier situations than this and got out of them."
"With Meadu's warriors at your back," I said as I placed my foot into his hands. I grasped the roof tiles and hauled myself up. Rhys made it easier, pushing me as high as he could. Despite a niggling doubt I wasn't too concerned about him, constables wouldn't arrest a warrior priest. Below me, the constables drew their swords and faced off against Rhys. They were alone in the lane. There were no witnesses. They could attack him with no one finding out what they'd done. Rhys had to rely on his own skill with the sword, and 2 against 1 weren't favourable odds. But he didn't even draw his sword. He simply ran at the wall below and leapt. Using the wall as leverage, he stretched up to grasp the overhanging roof. Swinging his legs, he managed to get half of his body onto the roof, but one of the tiles broke under the weight. He slipped. "Rhys!" I grabbed his shoulders. The pendant around my neck emerged from beneath my shirt as I leaned forward. I doubted I played much of a part in saving him, but somehow he managed to keep both arms on the roof while his body dangled down. Seeing an opportunity, the 2 constables leapt at his legs. At that moment, Rhys swung them up again. This time, the tiles held, and he pulled himself onto the roof. He lay on the sloping tiles and grinned at me.
"Don't look so terrified, Jack. I won't let anything happen to you."
I tucked the pendant back under my shirt. "Meadow and Lear, you're mad. Why didn't you just give yourself up? Or will you be thrown out of the order if your master hears of this?" He sat up.
"Never. I'm his favourite."
He stood and peered over the edge of the roof just as 2 hands suddenly gripped the tiles from below.
"Isn't that interesting?"
I scrambled to my feet. "What is?"
"They're still going. I'd have put money on them giving up by now. Come on, we'd better get a head start. You're going to need it since you don't have legs like a giant spider."
He indicated I should go up the roof ahead of him, much as a gentleman signals to a lady to enter a room first. To the tune of grunts coming from the two constables as they tried to get onto the roof, I used all fours to balance as I scrambled up the tiles. "If you get me killed, I'm coming back from the afterlife to haunt you."
"Our religion doesn't believe in ghosts."
"Then it's lucky I don't believe in religion." The ensuing silence felt heavy after the light-hearted moments we'd shared during our escape, but I needed to concentrate on my balance as I navigated the roofline, so gave it no further thought. I came to a stop as the building butted up against a taller one. We'd need to repeat our climb if we were to continue that way. The only other way out was down the sloping roof on the other side, then dropping into what appeared to be a courtyard surrounded by buildings. In other words, we would be easy to trap down there. I turned to face Rhys. "I don't fancy going up again."
"Afraid of heights?"
"No, I'm tired of being chased." He glanced over his shoulder.
"Do you have a plan?"
One of the constables was on the roof, although he looked unsteady on the steeply sloping tiles. He was calling down to his colleague, instructing him on the best way to get up. "Unlike you, yes." I was glad to see the humour return to Rhys's eyes. I wasn't sure why it bothered me that he'd been offended by my heathenism. All I knew was that I preferred his mischievousness. "I have some skill with a knife," I said. "I presume you have some skill with a sword. If we work together, we might have a chance." He chuckled. At the time, I had no idea why. Later, I would witness Rhys's skill for myself. Even with his eyes closed and a hand tied behind his back, two bumbling constables would offer no opposition. If I'd known that then, I would have found his actions even more baffling. Why didn't he just fight them then and there? Perhaps he didn't want to harm them, or perhaps he was simply enjoying himself.
"I have a better plan,"
he said. "It's about time," I scoffed. "What do you propose?" He looked down at the courtyard. "But we'll be trapped," I said.
"I told you, Jack. Have a little faith."
"Fine," I ground out. "Do I go first, or do you?" I'd not even finished speaking before he was on his way down the sloping roof. He hung onto the edge and swung himself down to the ground, landing deftly on his feet. He held his arms up to me.
"Jump! I'll catch you."
I stared at him, open-mouthed. Behind me, the constable stood on the ridge of the roof.
"Got you!"
he snarled. I jumped. Rhys caught me effortlessly. He didn't set me down immediately, however. With his hands at my waist, I was pinned against his body. The cloth of his tunic and the shirt underneath hid nothing, not the ridges of muscles across his chest, rising and falling with breaths that had suddenly become ragged for the first time. Could he feel the contours of my body through the layers of my disguise? Was that why his gaze suddenly heated as it locked onto mine? Eye to eye, chest to chest, I could easily kiss him. I wanted to kiss him. It was as if a madness had come over me, taking control. I'd never felt this brazen, this much desire and need. Rhys consumed my thoughts, even to the exclusion of my own safety, and I hadn't even known him an hour. I reached up my hands to bury them in his hair when he suddenly lowered me to the ground. That's when I heard a door behind me crash back on its hinges. I suddenly turned to see the second constable barreling out of the house and into the courtyard. He drew his sword.
"You should be ashamed of yourself, brother."
Rhys put his hands in the air.
"Let the lad go. He's just a hungry child."
"I thought you had a plan," I hissed.
"Who says it's not going how I wanted it to?" he hissed back.
"You wanted this to end in our surrender?"
"Not ours, just mine."
"I'm not letting you do that for me."
"All will be well. Nothing will happen to me, Jack. You can still escape through the sewers. I'm standing on the grate. When I step off, open it quickly. Climb down the ladder, then continue left. Always go left. Eventually you'll come out at the river."
"I know the way. You're not coming with me."
"I'll stay up here and keep him busy. Don't worry. I won't let him follow you."
I glanced up to where the constable on the roof was carefully navigating his way down the slope, arms out for balance, his attention focused on each slow, cautious step. Rhys stepped off the grate. I bent down and wrapped my fingers around the bars.
"Stop!"
The constable in the courtyard advanced. Rhys moved to block him, his hand still in the air.
"I said let the lad go."
The constable, however, thrust his sword point at Rhys.
"Move aside, brother."
Rhys glanced at me.
What's taking you so long?
It's stuck, I said.